Welcome to the Resiliency of the Human Spirit podcast, where we share all about human triumphs for the collective's healing and empowerment. I am your host, Priscilla Hanley. My guest today is Jodie Baulkham. Jodie is the owner of Jodie Baulkham Coaching and Consulting. She is a licensed teacher, professional coach, and certified leader character practitioner who focuses on cultivating character, igniting passion, and fortifying resilience for herself and others. Jodie is also the author of Choosing My Tomorrow, Surviving Murder, Navigating Mental Health, and Harnessing the Power of Choice. In this book, she shares her personal story as the spouse of a police officer who was killed in the line of duty and about living with her second husband who has PTSD. Jodie's passion is to empower others to create and choose a brighter tomorrow for themselves. Without further ado, I'll bring Jodie. Oh, Jodie, you're on right now. Okay. Go
Happy to
ahead.
be here.
Yeah, it's magic. You're already on the screen. So, Jodie, first of all, I just want to say I am so sorry for your loss. And
Mm.
I read your book, and it was a beautiful book. I felt your pain and I felt your grief. And, I am happy that you're here today because we have a lot of very important topics to cover. So I will just dive right in and have you start sharing your story with our audience on your journey and how everything started for you. And most importantly, how you are still living in a very empowered way.
Mm.
That's a very
Yeah.
important message, I think, for all of us to hear.
Thank you, Priscilla. I'm happy to be here. The adversity part of my story started 1 week after my 29th birthday. I had led a pretty happy existence up until that point. My parents were still together. I lived on a farm with my three sisters. I had success in my school life and in my sporting life. And I was married at a young age to the love of my life at 24 years old. And so I was a teacher, and Chris was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. And his first posting was in Canada's Arctic in the Northwest Territories. So he policed there. I taught there. We lived in the capital city, which only at the time had 18,000 people. Then, after 2 years, we were transferred to a fly in only settlement of 500 people. We lived there and embraced ourselves in the Indigenous community for 2 years, and then transferred again to Hay River, Northwest Territories, which was on the road system, which we thought was really great. And it had 3,500 people. And so he was policing there. I was teaching there. I became pregnant. And so I was on maternity leave with our daughter on Thanksgiving weekend. And I was up changing her diaper at 5:30 in the morning, and there was a knock at the door. And so I put Alexis back in her crib, and a friend of mine and a colleague of Chris's was on the other side, and she asked if he was home. And I said, no, he got called out a few hours ago. And she's like, well, we can't find him. We can't seem to reach him. And so in that moment, my mind starts to spin. I phoned a girlfriend of mine who lived down the street. She came over, and then Chris's corporal drove up into the driveway, and he gets out and he says, we found him. He's at the hospital. And so in that community and in the North itself, you prepare yourself to be medevaced on an airplane. So, the doctors work to stabilize you, and then you fly to a larger center. And so I was getting ready in my mind to be doing that. And then I was standing at the nurse's station, and I was writing down a list of all of the things that Alexis would need in the event that I needed to go. And in that moment, I felt myself being led into down a hallway and into a very small room by Mike. And he asked me to sit down. And then he closed the door and he knelt down on one knee. And before he even said anything, that's when I knew that I was not going to just be leaving on an airplane, that Chris had passed away. So in that moment, all of the dreams and all of the plans for the future that we had had as a young couple kind of shattered. And so I found myself a widow, single, and only parent, thinking about, finding myself in a reality that I had never planned for. And so that was my introduction to traumatic grief. And then the Canadian justice system, because there was a 6-day manhunt for this individual, and then it had to go through all of the courts. And so that does not, uh, that does not happen quickly. And so, what did that look like for the next couple of years? And so I had to make a choice of where I was going to move, Alexis and I, and we decided to move to Chris's hometown, which is in Ottawa, which is Canada's national capital. That's where he grew up. And I was close to his family there. And I thought it would be a healing for them to have Alexis close by. And so during this time, the RCMP and the policing community were very supportive. And they had asked me to be a part of a working group to help support families of police officers. And it was through that work and that exposure that I came to learn of an opportunity inside of the RCMP to work in their learning and development sector. And so I used my education degree and applied it to adult learning and curriculum development. So I've been working in the RCMP as a civilian employee since 2009. And through that work, I fell in love with another police officer. And this one had a desk job. I was like, I can't handle all of the stress of thinking that you're going to be injured on duty. However, he had a 27-year service and had seen things along the way that really started to impact him. And so we married 4 years after Chris died. And it was shortly after our wedding where I started to notice signs and symptoms of Brent's declining mental health. And so now I find myself in a spousal role of supporting someone that is struggling with mental health challenges. And then as well, while Alexis is growing up, when she was 9 years old, she came to me while I was reading in my bed one night and she was crying and she's like, "Mama, I can't control my equals." And what that meant for her was she was presenting with obsessive compulsive disorder. So she lives with that every day. And so she's now 17 years old. And so you got a little bit of a sense of timing in my life. So I've been on this journey for 17 years. And that's my story. And so and then I'm hoping we'll be able to get talking about all of the different things that I did to navigate those 17 years.
Yes, wow, such a profound journey and a lot to unpack here. So let me
Mhm.
start from the beginning of your journey when you lost Chris. So, in addition to grief, I bet you had a ton of fear within you
Mm.
because, you're a single mom, you have a baby to bring up, you just lost your husband. How was that like for you? I mean, how did you navigate the traumatic grief and the fear of a life that you didn't, like you said, you didn't plan for?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say that there's fear that I felt from the sense of not there was a 6-day manhunt for the killer. And so that level of fear, like actually like I'm fearing for my safety because I don't know if this person is going to be coming back for me because we didn't know the situation around what transpired in those final moments. It turns out that Chris had stopped at a known drug house looking for a missing person. He recognized a man coming out of the house as having an outstanding warrant. And so this person had a firearm prohibition, but he was carrying a gun in his waistband. And so when Chris went to frisk him, he started to run away, pulled out the gun, and then killed him that way. So those things all came out at the trial 2 years later. But in those moments, it's just like, we don't know what's going on. And so there was a police presence in my driveway 24/7 in those early days because they wanted to protect my family. So the sense of fear for my safety was one thing, but then it was that sense of uncertainty and lack of confidence about how am I going to be able to manage myself and my child moving forward, right? And so I think I just want to draw a distinction between those two things about, fear for one's personal well-being and then your sense of I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm going to be good enough. I don't know if I'm going to be able to give her what she needs. I don't know if I'm going to be able to climb out of this hole that I am in. And so still lived so far away from my blood relatives. My friends in the north were very supportive. I stayed up there for 8 months after the shooting in order to stay for the initial court proceedings. And during that time, the community rallied around me. I felt like it wasn't just my loss, but because it was such a tight-knit community, I felt like other people were grieving with me. And strangely enough, that gave me a sense of comfort. And so it was like, okay, we're in this together. We can do it differently and we can have different timelines, but at least I didn't feel like I was alone. And I think that's where a lot of people who are grieving, they feel it's very insular for them. And even though it's an individual journey for everyone, I felt supported by the fact that other people had known us as a couple, acknowledged what I had lost, and then what the community had lost at the same time, and someone that they appreciated and respected.
Right. So what are some of the techniques that you applied for yourself when those dark days showed up?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do to
Yes.
get yourself out of that hole?
So I was angry. And when I was angry, any sense of a filter that I had developed over the 29 years of my life was not, I couldn't access it. And what I mean, like I wasn't always my best self. I became very blunt because I didn't have the energy or the level of care to filter my words or put other people's needs before mine and Alexis's. And that actually served me quite well because I was asking for what I needed very clearly. And so I have refined the way that I ask things over the years. And while I can still be direct, I can be a little bit more polite. But in those moments, actually asking for what I needed, whether that, like, there were so many people in my home. I'm like, I need you to leave. Like, I need some quiet space. I need to just be by myself with my thoughts and my emotions and, hug Chris's shirt and cry or whatever the case
Mhm.
was. But then other times I wanted to be surrounded by those people. And so honoring my feelings and speaking them out loud, I found very helpful. And at that point, I didn't have a lot of ability to care about what other people thought, which was a blessing in disguise. I
Right.
was just able to like focus inward and not have that outward concern. So I found that very helpful. And then I stopped asking why is this happening to me? Why did my husband have to be the one who got called out that night? Why? And I found with that I would just spiral further into a hole
Mm.
because there was nothing, those answers weren't going to come. And so for me to stay there was just harming myself. And so I started to accept very early, okay, this is my reality. What now? What next? And so just that shift from not focusing on the why and choosing to focus on the what, that kept me moving forward each day. And I started with, okay, what can I control when it comes to my life right now? How I mother Alexis. That was my focus. What can I do? She's a baby. I don't want to transfer my pain to her. So, what can I do in order to support her development in the best way that I can? And I mean, when you've got a little person around who is oblivious to the pain that the adults are going through, they still giggle and they still laugh and they
Right.
still learn how to crawl and walk and do all the things that adults find joyful. So I had that as well. I was able to have moments of joy even when the pain was very real and very present.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking, what a contrast, watching your child grow up, which is so joyful, and at the same time not having your husband there. Do you know what I mean? It's like a
Mhm.
very stark contrast. And it's
Absolutely.
yeah. So I want to move now to your marriage with your second husband. In your book, from what I understand, is after you got married, you started noticing, I guess, changes in his behavior.
Mhm.
So I want to ask you, what exactly did you notice? And if you could elaborate a little bit on the onset of PTSD, what can we look out for to kind of like navigate this journey?
Mhm. There are common signs and symptoms when people are struggling with mental health, not necessarily, whether that's anxiety, whether that's post-traumatic stress, whether that's depression. And these I actually put in the appendix of my book as well. It's the continuum. And for Brent, it presented as initially he was having a hard time staying asleep. Okay. And he attributed that to, I'm traveling a lot. So, I'm in and out of hotels and time zones. And so it's like, okay, well, that explained it for a little while. And then with the lack of sleep came the shift in mood and the stability of his moods. So I was noticing he was quicker to anger. He would get frustrated more. Road rage, like we would be driving and he would get so upset so quickly at something that was happening on the highways or things like that. Uh, he started to bail out of social commitments that we had made, and he didn't want to be around other people. He started to watch more violent movies and started to watch like the UFC fighting and things that I hadn't noticed before in him. Communication was not what it used to be. He wasn't engaging in conversations. He wasn't eating as much as he was used to, or that I was used to seeing him. His alcohol intake did increase, not to the point where he had an addiction problem, but it was definitely more than he had drank in the past. And so I'm noticing all of these things. And then his headaches started to be more intense and more severe. What else did I notice? Just this general lack of wanting to do anything, like motivation had decreased. And so those were the initial signs, and those sustained themselves for a while. He continued to work full time. He continued to travel a bit. And then we had traveled from our city to where my sister lived in Toronto. It's about a 5-hour drive. And after a weekend of activities, we're driving back home, and he pulled over on a 4-lane highway and said, "You need to drive home." And I was like, okay. And so I get into the driver's seat and we're going, and I notice that he's crying underneath his sunglasses in the passenger seat. We continue to drive. I gave him a tissue, but he's not talking to me. Pull into the driveway, and he gets out of the car very quickly and goes into the house. I take Alexis out of the car seat. We go into the house. I'm looking for him. I can't find him. I'm starting to get nervous. I don't know where he is. He's not responding to my calls. And I found him in a guest bedroom, and he was shaking. He was in the fetal position and he was shaking. And I thought he was having a heart attack. I was trying to get him to be responsive. I said, "Do you have chest pains? Like what?" And he muttered no, and then just said, "It's my head." And so he had at that point engaged with a psychologist, but it was in this moment that his central nervous system just shut down and said, "The stress that you are under is too much. So I'm going to take over because you haven't been making the choices that you need to in order for your health." And so that started the longer medical road to recovery for him.
Wow. And I just want to ask, is he doing okay now? Is he better or?
So 12 years on, lots of therapy, lots of effort. The dealing with the post-traumatic stress, he has a very good handle on. He still suffers with periods of depression because he has a major depressive disorder. And I actually find as a family dealing with depression more difficult and dynamic than dealing with post-traumatic stress. He's done a lot of therapy, including cognitive behavioral talk therapy and different EMDR. So to process all of the actual trauma that he's been a witness to over the years. And so those things, I've noticed a stark improvement. Like the days that are the bad days now are nothing like they used to be.
Oh,
And
okay.
I am very thankful that when Brent was at his worst, Alexis was 5 and 6 years old. So when I just said, "Oh, daddy's got a headache," she was very accepting of that explanation,
Right.
So she was still similar to when I was going through my grief with Chris, and she was oblivious to the fact of all of the adult complications that were
Right.
going on around her. She was still very oblivious when she was little like that. And so she was able to still live in the princess fantasy world that little children do, and kind of escaped, I think, some of the effects that if she was older and had been more aware of what was going on and the difficulties that he was having and that was occurring in our marriage, it could have been much more difficult for her.
Right. And with you having gone through this, being the spouse of someone who has PTSD, so I want to ask you, are there sufficient resources, in your opinion, that's available for people with PTSD?
Oh, that's a big question. And I think it's very specific on where you live and
Mm,
what kind of benefit programs you may have access to. For example, in Canada, when you work in the policing environment, you have very good supports and benefits. It's the stigma that is often associated with mental illness that is the largest barrier to accessing care. So while there's lots of programs and the funding is available, people don't want to put their hand up to ask for it.
right, right,
And that was Brent's experience. Now, and this is, 14 years ago, but there has been work done in order to reduce the stigma associated with mental health, but there still is that at play for some people. And so I think, the more we talk about mental health and, admitting, yes, I have been impacted. Yes, I see a psychologist. I've been on medication because I'm, trying to get my brains to get to a spot where I can access other coping mechanisms, So I think when we talk about these things more openly, access to those resources will become more taken. People are going to use them a little bit more.
and I'm so glad, and that's why you're on this podcast. We're having a conversation, right?
Yes.
So I'm glad for that. So I want to ask you, what misconceptions about PTSD would you like to demystify for us today?
Mm. Sometimes there needs to be a differentiation between um, or a forgiveness towards, or an empathy and compassion towards how people are presenting themselves when they're struggling, and then other people's perception of that being a permanent personality um, presentation. So I guess, let me better explain. I would hope that people have more empathy when they know someone is struggling with mental illness, in that this is not their permanent personality, and to give a little bit more grace while they're going through the healing process, and not to get really offended or put off or cut out of their lives while they're going through the healing process,
Okay.
because it takes time and it looks very different for different people. And if you are someone who's trying to support someone with PTSD or someone who is struggling with mental health issues, and you're thinking you're doing a good job by asking them to go to a social event, or telling them, "Oh, you can just do this, suck it up for a little bit," like those types of things, if they're not able to do them, let them not be able to do them,
Mm,
and not take it personally when they may not accept your invitation to go out somewhere. It's not about you, it's about them and their journey.
right.
And so I guess, if when people have mental illness in your life, try to detach their decisions from you. Like, don't take it personally. And I talk about this in one of my lessons learned. It's because when I was able to stop thinking it was my fault that Brent was angry, or that things weren't happening the way that I wanted them to, that it wasn't my fault. This was just the journey that they're on, and it's going to ebb and it's going to flow. And when I was able to make that distinction, I was better able to focus on my own health, which let me be better as an individual, which led me to be better as a spouse, which led me to be better as a mother. So I'm not sure if that's a misconception, but it's just a point of offering to say, when you are in a relationship with this other person, it's not your fault that they are there.
Yeah, very profound point. Because when we're with a partner who's withdrawing and, don't want to interact with you, it's very hurtful sometimes. You feel hurt. And then the guilt starts going on in the head, like, oh, am I doing something wrong? Maybe I'm not good enough, blah, blah, blah. So we get into that vicious cycle. And I like that you're bringing this up now, to have empathy and compassion for the other person. So
Absolutely. You're right. It can totally erode your sense of confidence and self-worth if you let it. So being aware of that, you can start to change the narrative around it.
And I think also we need to be open to seek out help for ourselves. If we are having a difficult time coping with the situation at home, it's our responsibility to say, I'm not coping so well, and I need to get some help from me, for myself, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let me move on now to Alexis. And you said when she was, I want to say, I think it was
9.
5 or 9. Okay. When she was
9.
9, she came to you and she said, Mom, I can't handle my equals. Is that what she said? So what exactly did she mean when she said, I can't handle my equals? What does equal
Yeah.
represent for her?
So I asked that exact question in that moment. She came to me. I said, I can't control my equals. And so I said, when, honey, what does that mean? And she's like, well, when I go into my closet, if I touch my clothes with my one hand, I have to touch them with my other. And, if I touch my stuffies, I have to kiss them all good night in the same order, or I start
Mm.
over. And I had actually started to notice that her bedtime routine was taking much longer than it should. At that point, we had moved into a new house and we had painted her room and she had helped to decorate it. And she had her own bathroom separate from mine. And I could hear, behind a closed door, I could hear the water running at different intervals. And I'm like, man, it's taking her a long time to just brush her teeth. Well, she was in there, and she had this routine of counting out how many times she had to touch different surfaces. And so it was kind of those types of things. Once she came to me and said this, I started to notice these things. And so I engaged with Brent's psychologist first and said, this is what we've been noticing with Alexis. And he gave us a name of someone who specializes in children. And so we went to Dr. Armstrong, and Alexis started therapy sessions with her. And it was actually the tools that Alexis was given to by her therapist that helped Brent and I move forward as a couple better, because we had made, the agreement, we need to support Alexis. And so she's got this feelings wheel and she's identifying how she's feeling. We're at the supper table. So then mom has to identify how she's feeling and
Oh,
dad has to identify how he's feeling. And so that helped to facilitate conversations using a tool. And then for Alexis, it was she had to distract herself in order to not do the compulsion. So obsessive compulsion disorder. So the child has a worry and they feel that if they do the action, that's going to keep the person they're worried about safe.
okay.
Right. And so Alexis's worry was that typically, like, she wouldn't fall asleep and that someone would come into the house because she was sleeping and something bad was going to happen. And so as she's having these, but then, flicking on a light switch or touching her stuffies was going to make it all better. So what they
Right.
do to ease their mind isn't rational, but it makes them feel better in that moment. And so in order for Alexis to learn to sit with that level of discomfort, we had to have a plan where she would touch something and then engage in a distraction, so that while she was feeling that anxiety around not completing the action of the compulsive, that she was able to fill that with something else. And so she would play guitar or piano or come into the kitchen and we would bake cookies. So she was purposefully touching something and then engaging in the chosen activity, managing through that discomfort until it went away. And then she would, put a check mark or a sticker and she would be rewarded for it.
Oh,
And so when you're addressing mental health issues with children, it's a much different well, you know what? It's the same process, but you're just doing it with different skills. It's like taking myself back to when I was teaching kindergarten versus when I taught high school. Your teaching methods are similar, but the rewards and the way that you use your words are different. And so being able to take the lessons learned from Alexis and then applying those to Brent really helped to create a sense of success in moving forward in different parts of our family. But at the same time, all three of us were engaging individually with our own therapists and providers. And
right.
it wasn't until Alexis's diagnosis that I hit a wall. I was like, okay, I've gotten through the grief stuff. And I did have some counseling there, but not a whole lot. That I just, you needed to work through it. Then I have Brent's diagnosis, and I participate in couples, not couples counseling, but couples sessions so that his doctors could get a full picture of what was happening at home. And then, okay, I've got a handle on this. And then my baby comes to me struggling, and I was like, okay, I'm done. Like I'm too full. I don't have the reserve anymore. And so I went to see June, and Dr. June introduced me to the work of Brené Brown.
Okay.
And my homework was to, among other things, but it was to read Rising Stronger. And that really started to help me pull back the layers a little bit on what I was feeling. Because what I didn't realize I was doing until I went to therapy, I was trying to control everything in the outer environment. I was trying to create the best household. I was trying to project manage my way through every day. I had color-coded schedules. I was trying to make the environment for everybody else to thrive. And that just allowed me to ignore what I was feeling.
Mm, okay.
And so it was through this transformation and this insight that I started to be able to let myself go, and not let myself go, but just try not to fix stuff. And that was when I turned from the outer world to the inner world and really started to build my focus on personal development and resilience. And if I can manage what's going on in here really well, then it doesn't matter what's going on outside.
Okay. Can you give an example, like how you handled this? Say something happened in your house. How do you not want to fix it, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
So, like, for example, with Brent and I, if there would be some kind of action, or if he all of a sudden got angry, or before I used to try to go and talk with him right away about it, and that was to make myself feel better that I had engaged or I had done everything I could in order to do something, right, to try to resolve his feelings to make me feel better.
Mhm.
Where once I started to let things go, I was like, okay, he just needs some time. Like, if he wants to go to the basement and watch TV by himself, just let him. And, that gives me and him the space. He can go do his process. I can focus on mine. I'm not going to let it impact my confidence any longer. I can be empowered to do whatever I want in those moments, and it's kind of going back to that, not taking things personally. It's like, okay, he's able to, as long as he's safe, able to go and do that. Another example, kind of just letting things go, not trying to fix it. Any kind of relationships with Alexis and then her little friends as she's growing up, how there's tussles with other kids and things like that, and parents would come in and try to make things better. There's a time and space for that, but at the same time, let the kids talk it out.
Mm.
Let them engage in creating and finding the words. They might need some support, but before I would literally insert myself with the other child and have a conversation with them and leave Alexis on the outside. So it was that trying to be like, okay, if I can just control all of the actions of the other people, then the people that I love will be cared for and safe. And so when I was able to just let the others in my life engage in the processes that they needed to, so that I could disengage and do my own thing, that was really beneficial for us.
Wow, that is so profound. Because I think human nature, we all want to like, we got to fix everything, right?
Oh yeah. Well,
So,
my daughter used to call, she's like, Mom, you're not a helicopter mom, but you are often a helicopter wife.
what does that
Still
mean?
like, so helicopter parents are the ones that do what I described before. Like they're always trying to keep a safety cushion around their kids, cutting up their grapes into 5 different pieces, even though they're
Right.
12, trying to just reduce any opportunity for risk to be removed. And so, asking Brent, have you taken your medicine today? Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? I've stopped. I've stopped doing it.
Right.
He is a grown man. And if I continue to ask all of those things all of the time, then he's not going to be able to create the habits on his own,
Correct.
in order
Yeah.
to do them on their self, by himself rather. So it's just things like that where it's just like, okay, the more you try to protect, I think the more harm you actually can do. You're not allowing them to create and engage in the coping mechanisms that they need to either develop or employ in order for them to manage their own situations.
Yeah. And I think the important point here is that we need to respect everyone's journey because
Mm,
everybody is on their own journey. And like you said, Brent is a grown man. So we got to just let go and just respect their own journey. So,
absolutely.
okay, let's move on to your business. So what programs or services do you offer to the collective at this point?
So I have made the transition into being a transitional life coach. And so what that looks like is I specialize in helping people who are going through a large transition in their life. Like something has happened that has turned their world upside down and they're feeling lost and alone and confused and they're in this reality that they didn't plan for. And so I offer one-on-one coaching for those folks to go through a framework that helps to situate yourself, helps you identify who you are, builds your confidence up so that you can create the life you want on your own terms, even though it's not the one that you thought you were going to have.
Right.
So it's like stepping into this new reality for yourself with a sense of strength and confidence, and that you're doing it the way that you want to.
Okay. So you're a full-time transformational coach. You're no longer with the police force, is that correct?
I'm technically employed still, but
Okay.
I am so I was part-time. I went part-time with the police force when Brent was most ill and maintained that schedule in order to have a stronger level of support at home. And so I am exiting out of the government work to do this full time, as well as speak on the lessons learned and resilience. So speaking mostly right now to first responders and their families, but hoping to branch out a little bit more as well.
Wonderful. And I understand you have a special gift for our audience today, which is
Yes.
your free mini course. You want to
Yes.
talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks for allowing that. So I am, with my teaching education no background, I created a 5-day mini course that helps to promote healthy habits in your lifestyle in order to bring about a little bit more well-being. And so it can be used on your desktop or on your phone, and it just gives you a little bit of an idea, a little reset every day. 15 minutes if you want to engage. It talks about mindfulness, it talks about body movement, it talks about breath work, different habits that really can support resetting your physiology in order to help bring down anxiety, bring you into state of clarity and calm. So I offer that on my website.
Wonderful. And you also have a 30-minute free discovery call, is that correct?
Yes, if people are drawn to want to work with me, I'm happy to give you more of an idea of what I do and what that process looks like, to help you move from where you are today to where you really hope to be in the future.
Okay. And where can people find you if they want to work with you?
So I am on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. That's just my name. So at Jodie Baulkham, that's spelled JodieBaulkham. Also on my website, that's where you can go and get the mini course. So www.jodiebaulkham.com.
Okay. And your book is obviously available on Amazon.
It is Choosing My Tomorrow is available on Amazon.
Yes, I highly recommend that book because it's a beautifully written book. You're very eloquent in your writing. I gotta say that.
Oh,
You
thank you.
explain things very clearly. When I was reading it, I was like, wow, she writes really well. So
Thank
it's a
you.
really great book. So we have a couple minutes left. And so you know what's coming, right? The
I
signature
do.
closing question. So here is my signature closing question. What is your closing message for humanity to help in our collective healing and empowerment?
Yeah, I think that is such a great question. And I've been thinking about it since knowing that I was going to be coming on with you. And what I think is most helpful, especially in this time right now, is to embrace kindness, try to have a greater sense of understanding about the position of other people, and to show empathy. Each one of us has the power to make a positive impact on others. And by listening and showing compassion and supporting one another, we can foster more inclusion, which I think leads to having the ability to be more supportive. And so those small acts of kindness can ripple out and create some significant change. And so, how do we do that? Well, I would say that when you approach a situation from a place of caring and concern with genuine curiosity, then you're able to make and build genuine connections. And so I think it was Michelle Obama who said, it's hard to hate up close.
Mm.
And I love that because when you are standing steadfast in a position that you're trying to defend, it's really hard to actually hear and understand where the other person is coming from. So if we put ourselves in a position where we're engaging with other people that we may not always think to, or that are not part of our original circles, and we're learning about them, I think that can really help humanity understand each other better, and that will contribute to more connection and more healing.
I love that. We need to hear this message because there's so much chaos and division in the world right now. And you know what, your message, I think it's actually going to be the first step towards peace,
Mm,
right? When you try to
yeah.
understand somebody else's perspective and not being so rooted in your belief systems and not allowing other perspectives
Mhm.
to influence your own perspective. But you know, we're not alone in this world. There's like what, 7 billion people in this world.
Mhm.
So I think it's always important to, like you say, have empathy and compassion for where somebody else is coming from because we sure don't know what they're going through. You know,
Absolutely.
behind closed doors, maybe they're
Yeah.
struggling and they're just kind of projecting their anger or despair out on you. So if we can take that first approach of empathy and compassion, I think that it will help in a lot of peace in
Mhm.
this world. So thank you, Jodie, so much for being here. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And I would love to have you back on. I mean, you know, sometime next year, maybe you write another book. Just come back on.
Well, I appreciate the time. I will happy to come back, and just want to acknowledge the efforts that you're putting into having conversations like this with other people. I think that's going to resonate with so many and help towards building that empowerment and the humanity and the peace and all of the things that will make this world be more connected to each other.
Thank you very much. And for everybody who's watching and listening, thank you for your time. And until next time, bye for now.